today on the Tallinna Vesi webinar. The webinar will be hosted by the Chairman of the Board, Karl-Heino Brooks, and Chief Financial Officer, Riina Käi. Firstly, Karl-Heino Brooks and Riina Käi will introduce Tallinna Vesi financial results of the first quarter of 2017. Right after the presentation, we will open the door for questions. I invite you to use the question box to the right side of the screen to send in questions. All questions will be answered after the presentation. Please, Riina Käi and Karl-Heino, you can start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Everly. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the Q1 2017 webinar today. Financial and operational performance for the first quarter of 2017 has been very strong, and all of our operational KPIs have been delivered. As you will hear from Riina shortly, the financial performance of the companies has also been good, despite of the slight decrease in sales and operating profit. Due to the change of the fair value of swap contracts, the net profit is up by €724,000 compared to the same period in 2016. So, moving straight on to the operational update. The quality of water supplied to our customers remains excellent. There were no water quality sample failures from the 738 samples taken across our services area. This equates to 100% compliance. Complementing this, the final effluent discharged to the sea from our wastewater treatment plant at Tallinna was also 100% compliant with the stipulated standards and sample testing regime. The leakage rate has been the lowest over the years in the first quarter of 2017, being 13.72%, which represents excellent performance amongst other water companies and is actually the lowest in the company's history to date. The company has started its annual capital programme and it's been carried out according to the plan with no delays. So, moving on to the tariff dispute, and perhaps just a reminder of some of the background to start with. AS Tallinna Vesi has been in a local court dispute with the Competition Authority since 2011. The dispute arose because the Competition Authority has to date refused to approve the annual water tariff applications submitted by the company based on the service agreement that was signed back in 2001 when the company was first privatised. So just a reminder on each of the cases. So first of all, we look at the local court case. On the 5th of June 2015, Tallinna Administrative Court made their decision and dismissed ASTV's claim. Tallinna Administrative Court released the reasoning of the dismissal of ASTV's claim on the 12th of October 2015. The Administrative Court was of the opinion that the tariff part of the service agreement, which in itself was being deemed a public law contract by Estonian courts back in 2012, is not binding for the Competition Authority. AS Tallinna Vesi then filed its appeal to the District Court on the 11th of November 2015. District Court hearing took place on the 23rd of November 2016. This decision was made on the 26th of January 2017, which sadly was against the company. On the 27th of February, the company filed the cassation to the Supreme Court, and the current status is that we are awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court as to whether or not they will accept the cassation. The company continues to be of a position that a service agreement, which was signed back at the time of the privatisation, is legal and should be fulfilled. Until the final verdict in the tariff dispute, the preliminary injunction applied by the Estonian courts remains in force, which means the tariffs will remain frozen at their 2010 levels. So, in parallel to the local court case, we're also pursuing a legal case via international arbitration via the International Centre for Settlement of Investment Disputes. So, after years of trying to negotiate a solution, the Supervisory Council of Tallinna Vesi decided to commence international arbitration proceedings against the Republic of Estonia for breach of the bilateral investment treaty between the Netherlands and the Republic of Estonia. The hearings were held in Paris last year between the 7th and 11th and the 14th and 15th of November. The hearings were broadcast live on the internet, and if you look at the investor homepage, you will find links to those actual videos from the hearings. Both parties submitted their post-hearing briefs in February this year, and the decision expected from the arbitration panel sometime towards the middle of this year. The process remains ongoing, and of course we'll update investors as and when there are any developments with respect to both legal cases. I'm now going to hand you over to Rina, who'll take you through the results for Q1 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, and good morning to everyone. Now I would like to give you the overview of the financial performance of Aktsiaselts Tallinna Vesi in the first quarter of 2017. I will start with the financial highlights and then will give more detailed overview about sales and costs. The performance of the group continues to be good and stable. Total sales revenues were 4.1% or 0.6 million euros lower than in the first quarter of 2016. The sales of stormwater services inside the service area decreased by 0.26 million euros and construction and asphalting services decreased by 0.58 billion euros, whilst total water supply and wastewater disposal services sales increased by 1.6% or 0.21 million euros year on year. Gross profit in the first quarter of 2017 was lower by 1.6% or 0.13 million euros compared to the same period in 2016. Gross profit was impacted by lower stormwater revenues and lower construction services sales, which was balanced by higher electricity costs and other costs of goods sold. Water and wastewater revenues from inside and outside service areas were higher than in the first quarter of 2016. Operating profit was lower by 2.2% or 0.15 million euros compared to the first quarter of 2016. The operating profit was mostly impacted by earlier mentioned lower gross profit. Compared to the first quarter of 2016, the net profit of the company was 12.8% or 0.72 million euros higher. Additionally to the changes mentioned earlier, it was impacted by lower net financial expenses, which in itself mostly came from the positive change in the fair value of swap contracts. Now let's move on to the next slides, and I will comment on the changes in revenues and expenses a bit closer. Let's start from the sales. As mentioned before, total sales revenues for the first quarter of 2017 decreased by 4.1%. Total revenues from water and wastewater services were by 1.6% or 0.21 million euros higher than in the first quarter of 2016, amounting to 12.7 million euros. As we operate with the frozen tariffs since 2010, the change in revenues is solely driven by the consumption. In the first quarter of 2017, water and wastewater revenues from the main service area increased, whilst the water and wastewater revenues from outside service area were slightly lower than in the first quarter in 2016. The domestic consumption from Tallinna and South area remained stable compared to the same period in 2016, increasing only by 0.2% to 7.34 million cubic meters. Slightly bigger increase of 3.7% or 90,000 cubic meters came from the consumption of commercial sector. The consumption in commercial sector was 2.53 million cubic meters. The increase in domestic sector came solely from apartment blocks, which is also our biggest customer group. The consumption in apartment blocks increased by 0.6%, and it was balanced by the decrease in other client groups. In commercial sector, the growth came equally from industry and leisure sectors. Total volumes from outside areas decreased by 9.8% or 153,000 cubic meters compared to the comparative period in 2016. It was mainly related to the decreased stormwater volumes, which decreased 39% or 180,000 cubic meters. The water and wastewater volumes were relatively stable, being 2.46% or 27,000 cubic meters up. Stormwater volumes from main area were down by 42.4% or 2.9 million cubic meters. The construction and asphalting services revenues were lower by 76.2% or 0.58 million euros in the first quarter of 2017 compared to the last year's first quarter. The decrease was related to pipe construction. This now takes us to the overview of costs. The company's underlying operating performance in the first quarter has been good. The total cost of goods sold in the first quarter of 2017 decreased by 7.6% or 0.46 million euros compared to the same period in 2016. Direct production costs were at the same level to the costs of the first quarter in 2016. Higher electricity costs and chemical costs were balanced by lower pollution tax costs and water abstraction charges. Water abstraction charges were higher by 1.7% and were driven by increase in the treating volumes. Chemical costs were lower mainly due to the lower usage of coagulant and methanol in the wastewater treatment process, being balanced by higher prices. Electricity costs were up by 5.4% or 44,000 euros due to the higher prices than in the first quarter of 2016, balanced slightly by low usage due to the decrease in volumes in wastewater treatment process. Pollution tax expense decreased by 13.1% to 0.29 million euros, mainly due to decrease in treated wastewater volumes, balanced by higher pollution load of different pollutants. Construction and asphalting services costs decreases related to lower construction and asphalting services revenues mentioned earlier. Decrease in administrative costs is mostly affected by lower dispute-related legal costs. Legal costs still will continue to affect the administrative costs up to the end of both local and international disputes, the amount of which is dependent on work that needs to be put into both disputes. Net financial expenses have mostly been affected by the non-monetary revaluation of the fair value of swap contracts, having the positive net expense of 0.9 million euros year on year. If we would now move on to the cash flows. The cash position as of 31st of March in 2017 is strong. The company's cash balance stood at 38.5 million euros, forming 17.6% of the total assets. Compared to the end of the first quarter of 2016, the cash balance has decreased by 5.66 million euros. The biggest contribution to the cash flows comes from the main operations. The company's collection of receivables continues to be high, being 99.4% on average. In 3 months of 2017, net cash flows from investing activities resulted in a cash outflow of 2.3 million euros. The money paid for fixed assets has been showing an increase of 0.9 million euros compared to the comparative period in 2016, amounting to 3.2 million euros. The compensations received from the pipelines increased by 0.7 million euros compared to the 2016, amounting to 0.9 million euros. Financing cash flows are relatively stable, being affected by the increased interest payments of 0.05 million euros. Now I will give it back to Carl.
Okay, thank you, Rina. So the final slide in the presentation relates to the dividend proposal for this year, which will be taken to the AGM. This has already been the subject of a stock exchange announcement that was made earlier this morning. So going back to my earlier comments, we are awaiting this year decisions from both the Estonian Supreme Court, and we're also awaiting the results of the international arbitration. In April, the Supervisory Board of Tallinna Vesi reviewed the dividend proposal to be presented at the annual general meeting of shareholders in the beginning of June. It was decided that 60% of last year's dividend will be paid out in June, and the remainder, 40%, will be decided upon depending on the outcome of the dispute and decided separately. In the current stage, no change in the dividend policy is being made. It will propose to the AGM to pay out 54 cents per A share and €600 per B share to be paid out in June 2017. The company remains confident of the legality of its service agreement with the City of Tallinn, and this includes the tariff mechanism which is contained within it. So that concludes the update. As ever, we'll always keep you updated by stock exchange announcements if and when we hear anything further. I'm now going to pass you back to Everly, who will coordinate any questions you may have.
Thank you, Karl-Heino and Riina-Kai. And dear audience, now you have a possibility to ask questions, so please use this opportunity right now. Dear audience, once more, please use your possibility to ask questions from Karl-Heino and Riina-Kai. And we have one question. I will read it for you. Why are you creating the cash reserve? I am referring to not paying out 100% immediately.
Okay, I'll pick up that question. So as mentioned before, this year We are awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court as to whether or not they will accept the cassation in respect of the local court case, and we're also awaiting the outcome of the international arbitration, which is expected towards the middle of the year. Both of these decisions could have an impact potentially on future revenues of the company, and the Council therefore feel it's prudent to withhold some of the dividend payment until after we know any more information with respect to those two decisions.
Thank you, Karl-Heino. Dear audience, any more questions? So we have no more questions. So thank you, Karl-Heino Brooks and Riina Käi, for the presentation.
Eveli, please wait. Just one question arrived.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have another question. But the company would be cash from positive also in case of negative outcome of legal proceedings.
Okay.
Dear audience, thank you for participating. Today's webinar is off now. Thank you, Karl-Heino Brooks and Riina Käi once more, and see you next time. Have a good day. Third question.
Okay. I assume I'm on air. I think we've just had a third question that came in as we were closing down. Okay, and the question is on screen here is, can it be that the court decision will not appear during 2017? The actual decision from the Supreme Court, there's no defined period to give us the decision whether or not the cassation will be accepted. Legal advice suggests it's a minimum of 3 months based on previous cases, but as I said before, there is no firm date for which we'll get that decision. So I guess in answer to the question, it could be postponed until next year, and we don't know at this stage.
Thank you, Karl-Heino. So we have another question. I will read it for you. Would it be possible for investors to visit Tallinna Vesi on site, an excursion or similar event?
Okay, thank you for your question, Martin. As ever, it's a pleasure for us to welcome investors to our site. So yes, I'm sure if investors would like to visit one of our operational sites, we can set something up in the future for you.
Thank you, Karl-Heino. Please ask questions. So once again, thank you, dear audience. So now the webinar is finished. Thank you, Karl-Heino Brooks and Riina Käi, and have a good day.